Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to this, our fourth ever Westminster, New York Council of Churches and Focus Churches of Albany co-sponsored State Street Forum. This time is a little venture of ours attempting to make more explicit a conversation that's often a little under the radar that connects issues in public life, current event issues, with faith, coming at it from a faith perspective, so that people of faith in New York State can engage with some of the events of the day, not just as people who are just concerned citizens, but come out of some of our deepest motivations around our faith commitments, and to bring that into the public square, so that we become even more effective advocates and dialogue partners and find ways to engage with public life. So the issue that we're going to talk about today, we entitled the topic for today, Human Infrastructure. And when Peter and I started thinking about talking about this about a month ago, Peter made the comment, and if everything is passed by then, we could always just sort of review our legislative successes and talk about how it was all going to play out. Remember when you said that, Peter?
Yeah, I do.
We thought, haha. So we're the massive infrastructure bills before Congress right now are far from passed. And in fact, the debate has gotten even more fraught about how we're going to proceed and what issues will need to be chucked and what we're going to hold on to going forward in what is essentially a massive attempt to fund human infrastructure as well as the physical infrastructure. So with those parameters, let me turn it over to Peter, who will introduce our speakers today. We're going to just hear from a presenter and a respondent, and then the rest of our time together will be for conversation among us.
Great. Thank you, Heather. And it's just really a pleasure to be here with you today and to welcome our two distinguished guests who are going to help us more deeply understand why infrastructure is so important on a human scale. So to help us understand what is happening or not happening in Washington right now, pleased to introduce Mary Clark, who is the Federal Issues and Regional Coordinator for Action. For the Council of Churches, Mary is one of our most trusted sources of information about what is happening or not happening in Washington. And we really appreciate her insights, which we get by participating in weekly briefings on Wednesdays at noon, which Mary convenes. We've been very pleased to collaborate with her on a variety of federal pieces of legislation over the years, including stopping the repeal of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, and also pushing back on the Trump tax cuts and trying to prevent those from going into place. At present, she's showing us the way on how we can best advocate for the Build Back Better plan, and is most equipped to address the topic today, infrastructure on a human scale. So, Mary.
Hi, thank you so much. And our partnership with the Council of Churches has been remarkable. And it's always good to partner with the religious community like yourself because it really brings into perspective the moral perspective of why we really need to do that and focused on the human needs. And it gets us more down to what average people need, because you see it in your places of worship week to week. You see the human struggle out there, and it's always good to make that attachment, and you provide really legitimacy and some real power to any of these arguments. So we always thank Peter for, he's traveled all around the state with us, speaking out, speaking at key conferences, and we can't thank you enough. But now you want to know what's happening in Washington. No, who don't? I think now that I've talked to, really it's a real insider game what's happening right now, but there are always leaks in Washington. And so I'm telling you my best guess of what has happened. It appears, we've been working on this Build Back Better proposal for the past year to really give us hope that we can make really transformational changes and provide for human needs and fulfill, I think, our moral obligation to make sure that people can thrive and develop. So what's happening now is the Democrats are very close to a final deal. We've all heard that. And actually, it's really closer than we think. It's like they're saying within the next 24 to 48 hours, they should develop a framework on what is going to be in the Build Back Better. Not the details, but just a framework that we can move forward with. I think for some time now, we are a little disappointed that we've dropped from a $6 trillion proposal down to a $3.5 trillion proposal. Now what it looks like is that it's going to be really closer to $2 trillion. Years ago, when we would work on anything, we could never imagine spending $2 trillion on human needs. But so we can make some real transformative changes that really affect and impact people's lives, even with the $2 trillion. It's disappointing that it's dropped and our expectations are lower in terms of what we can include in the package. So what is happening there is there are now discussions, and this is what they're trying to work out. There was initially two sides. One was to cut drastically the number of programs that would be included in the bill versus kind of what they call the haircut approach of like cutting fewer programs, allowing a robust number of programs, but over just a shorter period of years. It looks like they're doing some type of combination of both the choices in the negotiations to actually get something passed. I think this gives us an important time to really, in these last few days and last few weeks, we want to make sure the final deal includes investments that are crucial for reducing poverty, reducing racial disparities, income disparities, health disparities, and building an economy that works for everyone. We need to keep the overall momentum, even though it doesn't include maybe all the things that we want to see. We need to keep the overall momentum, that this deal does not fall apart, because that's the other danger, that this deal could fall apart if we don't keep pushing that we need this to to actually get done. I think some of the top issues when we look at issues from the, kind of the moral and the faith perspective, and keeping in mind, trying to reduce poverty, trying to reduce struggles for people, what are key things that we want to see? One of the things that we saw in the American Rescue Plan that was put out last year was this expansion of the child tax credit. And I can't tell you, and I'm sure you all know stories of people, what a difference it made in people's lives. It gave that people like breathing room from month to month once they started getting these subsidies. This has been one of the biggest things in terms of reducing child poverty. 40% of the children that were in poverty before this provision actually have been lifted out of poverty. We really want to make sure this maintains and allows the families to have that breathing room without means testing, without putting working requirements, without doing that. Those things that actually kept many poor children out of poverty because their parents didn't earn it, kept many children away from getting the tax credit because their parents didn't earn enough money. So some of the poorest of children never received the tax credit. That was straightened out. We really need to advocate for that kind of thing. I think some of the other things is housing vouchers and housing, that we want to see housing. And that's, I may tell you, it'd probably be clearer for you with the child tax credit. It looks like in the deal that we've seen so far, that they're going to extend the child tax credits for at least another year, possibly 2 years. But so we'll live to fight again to make this a permanent thing. But we definitely doesn't have any of the negative provisions like work requirements and things. So that's good what we see so far. So that's in there. Housing vouchers and housing development for low and moderate income housing, that is in there, but there's a big fear that that money will be severely reduced or actually eliminated. So that's one area I think all of us really need to really advocate, that we need this housing money. It's not enough to just build housing. We need to be able to afford the housing, and thus comes in the vouchers. Because we know one out of every 4 people who qualify for a housing voucher, it's only 1 out of every 4 people actually get a housing voucher. And I think you all know many long waiting lists and different things. So we need to really focus on that. Also, I think we're really looking at affordable health care. The rescue plan had provided subsidies to millions of people so that they could afford health care, much better and more robust than the ACA provided. We want to see that continue because, it provided some 4 million people getting access to health care. The other thing that we're really pushing for is the Medicaid expansion. It doesn't affect us here in New York State, but it is truly the 12 states that didn't opt into the Medicaid expansion. This will provide health care for millions of people, particularly people of color, and the lower income folks that have been boxed out of healthcare. So we want to see that expansion, the subsidies still continue. I think there's other key things that we want to look at, kind of that really help families and provide the support that they want, is quality childcare, paid family leave, those kind of things besides the healthcare investments. What we're finding with they're talking about reducing childcare to a smaller number. Paid family leave, they're talking about go 4 weeks instead of 12 weeks. But we need to make sure that people understand, and funding for pre-K. We need all those family support things for our children and families. So it's the childcare, the paid family leave, the pre-K programs. So those are kind of, I think these are kind of the ones that we feel are most at risk at the moment. So we need to really be pushing for those kind of things. There's a whole host of other things that we care deeply about. It's home and community-based care to provide health care for people to keep them in their own homes. That had started off at $400 billion. It's down to possibly like $100 billion. And the real concern about that is that they put some money in the Recovery Act to do this. And many states did not opt into using it because they didn't think it was going to exist afterwards. So states didn't spend the money. So the legislators are looking at this and saying, maybe we shouldn't do this. So that if you care about home and community-based care, that is one that could possibly drop off. So I think now our time is to say, is to raise these critical things on healthcare, on child tax credits, child and family support services, the medical leave, the child care allowances, those kind of things we need to do. The Medicare expansion, which is probably one of the most popular programs, they're really all over the place because there's an issue in regard to the Medicare prescription drug negotiation component that they were looking at, and that was what would cover and fund the Medicare expansion. So they're talking about really dialing that back, looking at maybe running some pilot programs, and that would expand Medicare to cover vision, eye care, and dental. It comes with a hefty price tag, and that's that's the concern. But if we were to do the Medicare negotiation of drug prices, we would be able to actually fund that expansion. But there's a lot of pushback now in Congress of people walking back, who are big pharma friends and being financed by big pharma to really push back against the full negotiation of drug prices. So with all that said, there's like tons of other things in the bill. We certainly care deeply about our climate. There's been huge pushback by Joe Manchin. I think that is being reduced kind of drastically, and I don't do climate, so I'm trying to get the proper names for, with Joe Manchin, he is pushing back on some of the key provisions. But there's still some funding in there, but it's talking about being reduced as well. But I think with all that said, there's still things that there are still really good things in the bill. There is the funding for, there's funding for all of our priorities that are in there. We got to keep fighting to keep them in there. But most of all, we want to say to our Congress people, you need to pass this bill. You need to pass as much of this bill as you can, and don't delay, and don't let this completely fall off the radar screen, because the money that they are agreeing to, or it appears like they're agreeing to expand healthcare access and affordability, to provide for the child tax credit that raises kids, even though it's only for a year, it still raises and keeps kids out of poverty. The child, our child and family support services are in there. And I, like I said, we need to fight for the housing, the home and community-based care, but we don't want to lose sight of moving forward and actually really pushing to get this passed as soon as possible. And if I have time, I could just give you a little rundown on the timing on this if you want.
Mary, why don't you just give us a quick rundown on timing, and then we're going to turn it over to Phil for a few words of response, and then I'm sure a lot of us have questions.
Yeah, and the timing on this, what's happening now is that they are going to pass the bricks and mortar infrastructure bill. It looks like there is an agreement to pass that by October 31st. It looks like the goal is to have this structure, you know, the loose outline of what the components of the bill to be actually done, you know, within the next couple of days, to have that framework already created so that they can go, you know, the varying different sides can go into Friday and feel comfortable that this is moving forward. Then there's going to be a small people in the room like our Senator Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and several others to really finalize the final components of the bill that will go to the House. It will go through the House of Representatives first. We need to encourage all our members to vote for that final package. This will all probably take through most of November, and we're looking, once it passes the House, to actually go, and there'll be final wranglings and we'll be alerting people what's on the table, what's being discussed. But I think the final framework will be done, and we're hoping to get it voted on by December 3rd, when all the other budget and debt ceiling limit timeframe. So that's what it looks like now.
It's helpful. Great.
Well, thanks a lot. Let me turn it over to Reverend Phil Tom from Riverside Church in New York City. We thought of you, Phil, for a response, not just because you're, of course, an articulate man of faith, but because you have really been hands-on with the work of, especially in the housing area, in sort of connecting religious communities with this sort of the work of building our infrastructure, human and hard infrastructure. So let me invite you to share your reflections briefly, and then we'll open it up for questions from everybody.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, greetings. My brief comments will probably, again, bear with me, be somewhat repetitive with some of the comments that Mary made. So just hang in there with me. So let me just say, the Build Back Better plan is significant legislation that promises to radically reduce poverty and wealth inequality, but it is also a social justice action plan that includes many issues that aligns with the values and teachings of the church and interfaith community. Our biblical teaching calls us to address individual and systemic acts of injustice that create unjust and inequitable policies and practices relating to race, housing, healthcare, education, employment opportunities, immigration, and the penal system. God calls us to provide compassion and work for justice for the most vulnerable in our society: children, older adults, immigrant, vulnerable families. These two passages are probably familiar with you. The psalmist proclaims in Psalm 82, verse 3-4, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. And in Matthew 25, verse 35-40, Jesus says to the righteous ones, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer, Jesus, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you. Jesus replied, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did for me. Riverside Church and many churches are participating in the Poor People's Campaign, organizing the 140 million poor and low-income people in America to support the policies provided in the Build Back Better plan. So how does the Build Back Better plan help move our biblical mandate forward? According to a recent Federal Reserve report issued, the top 10% wealthiest Americans own 89% of stocks and mutual fund shares. So while trillionaires spend their millions and money on their toy rocket ships, millions of Americans struggle to put food on their table, clothing on their backs, and a roof over their heads. The Build Back Better plan would provide funding, as Mary said, for childcare, home and community-based services, extend the childcare tax expansion, expand Medicare, and provide a living wage. The National Domestic Worker Alliance proclaims that these policies are job enabling and job creating, and that they will boost not only our economy, but the families who live in poverty or are low wage earners. Also, again, as Mary said, there are still 12 states that have refused to expand Medicare to low-income adults under the Affordable Care Act. The majority of the over 2 million people currently in this coverage gap in these states are people of color. In our worship service last Sunday at Riverside Church honoring Children's Sabbath, the Reverend Dr. Starkley Wilson, president of the Children's Defense Fund, powerfully reminded us that 71% of children in America live in poverty. 71%. And again, as Mary said, poverty experts believe that the child tax credit expansion would cut child poverty in half, lifting 5 million children out of poverty. The federal minimum wage has not changed since 2009 at $7.25. Now, of course, some states have already increased it to 15, but again, that's state by state. It's not the national federal minimum wage. The National Low Income Housing Coalition produces its annual outreach report, and its 2020 report says that the cost of fair market rate housing for a modest one-bedroom apartment in decent condition would require a wage of $20.40 per hour. We are not talking about luxury housing here. This reality means that the cost of renting a one-bedroom apartment is out of reach for the millions of Americans earning the federal minimum wage. We don't have to look too far to wonder why our homeless population of individuals and families is rapidly growing, not only in cities, but in rural communities. This problem is why we need a living wage and a significant increase in affordable housing, as the vouchers, as Mary said. Riverside Church is working collaboratively with a group called Community Voices Heard, a coalition of New York City public housing residents, to upgrade and develop affordable, safe, and decent housing for its current and future residents. Finally, Riverside Church's beloved Earth community and its green community are working collaboratively with numerous environmental activist organizations, such as the Sunrise Movement, led by young youth activists, environmental activists, to stop climate disaster. The Build Back Better plan includes a variety of tax credits, grants, payments, and fines for businesses and communities working towards clean energy initiatives. We need to stop the exploitation and destruction of our Mother Earth. God entrusted Mother Earth to us to be her caretaker and steward, not to abuse and destroy her, and thereby destroy humanity in the process. So let me close by saying, as members of God's beloved community, we need to pass the Building Back Better plan to not only reduce poverty and wealth inequality, but also to provide justice and equitable treatment for all of God's people. Amen.
Thank you.
Wow, that was fabulous. Thank you so much, Reverend Tom, and thank you, Mary, for giving us such a detailed presentation on what's going on in Washington. It's often very hard for people just listening to the news to grasp the level of detail of what is happening. And this is one of the things we seek to address in this forum, is to help people who are listening to news to get the straight scoop. So thank you so much for both of your presentations today. So at this time, I'd like to open it up for questions and see if somebody would like to start.
I have a question. I don't know if it's fair to start off, but maybe I'll just get the ball rolling here. And I don't know if, well, let's just say for the purposes of this forum, there are no stupid questions. Okay. Could we just agree to that? What I appreciated, Mary, you're talking about what some of the core, what's at the core, and what appears to be moving forward in the bill. I feel right now, every time I pick up the newspaper, I'm hearing about stuff getting chucked out, where most recently this morning, the news was that college debt forgiveness is being just wholesale chucked out. And I understood that there was a specific agenda that blocked some of the energy, green energy credit kind of thing. I just don't understand why, instead of chucking out other full provisions or proposals, I don't understand why everything doesn't get ticked down. Instead of that, we spend less on everything instead of throwing out categories. Maybe that's a stupid question, but there's so much money in here. Couldn't we still support all of these things just at a slightly, just bring the trillions down a little bit?
I mean, that was the kind of the haircut approach that we talked about, that Jayapal and the Progressive Caucus were talking about. It's like, leave these critical things in here, but we'll just fund them at a smaller level and over a shorter period of years. Some of the things that are being chucked out full hog are really things, unfortunately, that Joe Manchin is opposed to. And they're trying to get this little caucus of, because we need the 50 votes. And unfortunately, the college tuition component was something that he did not feel he wants to get into, means testing, all of these other things. And Biden is trying to push back, and we don't know, like trying to put in, well, we'll give more subsidies to people going to college. And so that's rather than give free tuition. So they're trying to negotiate, and the things that we see being full scale chucked out are provisions like some of the clean energy stuff, which again, we have Manchin to thank for that. And so it's really, they're making the sausage, and it's really messy. And that's why I really strongly urge us to really raise our voices of things that there should be no objection to by our Senator Manchin, like the housing vouchers, the home care, home and community-based care. Those are kind of on a slippery slope falling off. And I particularly think we need to be raising our voices to keep those kind of things in, because it isn't running into the Manchin objection, so to speak. And I think that's what when Peter was saying, we get so confused by media, I think a real critical thing is to not argue about the money, but about the criticalness of keeping these components in and why we need to keep them. So I think we need to raise our voices really high in regard to housing, in regard to the community-based care, and just all the other priorities, but yeah, those are things. And that's how it's being done. And they're really pandering to looking for the votes that they need to pass things.
Fran, do you have a question there? Or is that just a sigh? Would you like to unmute and ask a question?
I think she is.
There. Yeah. It's just incredible to me that this is a one-party thing. Isn't it amazing? There's nobody in the other party that cares about this. And that's just a comment. This is, it's a people thing, and I'm sure there are more members of Congress that care, but I understand the concerns about the debt, but economists seem to feel that it will benefit the country in the long run.
Yeah, and we should never get lost in the debt issue, because all of these things can be easily paid for. And it's been proven without raising taxes on, it's really taxing the wealthy, the extremely wealthy, and the corporations. And all of this is affordable. I always say, we have enough money. It's just all in the wrong pockets, so we need to really keep that mantra that we also want to see the taxing of the corporations and the very rich. And now Cinema from Arizona has come out against that. And so that's going to just cause a whole nother debate, but we need to keep pushing because majority of people think taxing the rich and the corporations are the right thing to do. So I always say, when we say what we want, we also say we know how to pay for it. And we have to have that mantra in there too.
Well, it's interesting that when military funds are needed, they find a way to pay for that and pass that kind of billions in no time. So
Trillions. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, if I could just build on this a little bit more. So part of what is happening in Washington is really a shift in economic theory from what we call a neoliberal approach or a supply side economics approach, which is that if you give more money to rich people, that money will circulate through the economy and benefit everyone else. And whether you're Republican or Democrat, almost all those people went to Econ 101 and their colleges and learned that theory and monetary theory, which is the idea that if you can regulate the economy through the modification of interest rates. What we have discovered is that that never really worked. And it only contributed to bigger deficits, and that the money really did not circulate through the economy as promised, which has led us to revive a much older, I guess what we call Keynesian framework, which is that if you give money to people at the bottom or in the middle and let them spend it and invest in them, that those dollars are going to circulate through the economy in a much more impactful way, which will actually increase tax revenue and put less strain on the national debt. So the Trump tax cuts, or Trump tax scam, as we are more fond of saying, was really that whole supply side theory on steroids, which led us to a much larger national debt, and it's not paid for in terms of the economic benefits that I was supposedly going to derive. With this plan, which is more of a bottom-up kind of investment, combined with tax increases, it really should be revenue neutral, if not increasing the amount of revenue which comes to the federal government for other things. I'll give you one more example. The New York Housing Conference put out an excellent study on the impact of housing vouchers and how, if you can significantly reduce the portion of income that people have to use on housing from, say, on average 40 or 50 or even 60% of household income, and with a housing voucher, get that to the point where people are spending no more than 30% of their income on housing. That releases a lot of other dollars which can be used to purchase food, childcare, healthcare, and other necessities, which will circulate much more efficiently through the economy, say, than buying like a big F-35 jet, for instance, or giving it to a rich person who will simply just bank the money and it never really does anything economically productive.
All right, let's get a few more questions in here.
Oh, and by the way, when Joe Biden went to college, he didn't take that Economics 101 course. He took the one that everybody should have taken when I was in college, which was based more on the economic Keynesian model, which he's pushing now. So there's something good about having an 80-year-old president.
Well, some of my favorite leaders are 80 years old, so. Okay, let's get a few more questions in there. We've got to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty of advocacy and how to engage the faith community in this conversation. And it can be, I mean, one of the problems, Mary, with this is that everything is in one single bill, right? Versus saying to the folks who are really on it with the environment, hey, we're going to go on a big drive with this environment issues bill. Okay, here's our child tax credit bill. Here's our housing bill. And you can really, peg what the bill is about and advocate for it. This is such a fascinating process to put the entire agenda into a single bill and say we're going to pass it all now. Do you feel like that's a challenge for advocates?
It's a real challenge for advocates. And what we saw people was organizing in silos and kind of not, and we've talked about that, like trying to bring everyone together to push for the, it in a collective way. Yeah, no, this has been, it's a good lesson in organizing of, it just wasn't, you see the difference between when we passed the HCAN, when we passed the Affordable Care Act, it was one thing that everyone focused on. And I think we'll take some takeaways from that. But I think what we need to be doing now, though, and whatever's done in the past, we can't undo. But I think what we need to be is educating people how critical and what this bill contains and how it affects people, because I think we're lost in the dialogue, and all that's being reported on is 3.5 trillion or 2.2 trillion, and nothing's being said. We raised, half our kids out of poverty. Let's continue to keep kids out of poverty. We've been able to, housing is such a critical thing. Healthcare, the healthcare advances, we need to start focusing on to say to people, this is a good bill and it contains a lot of things. It probably won't contain everything that we want to see. But as we move forward to get the final push, it's like, we need you to pass this. And, I think the discussion within the next 2 weeks will be not about what else needs to be in the bill. We'll kind of have that framework, but we still need to say you need to get it done. Because there's a very likelihood that people say, I don't want to spend it. They focus on, I don't want to spend $2 trillion because they don't know the value of what's in the bill. Because people like, yeah, it has childcare, it has, it keeps kids out of poverty, it gives us more health care. I think the promise was really big, so I'm worried that people will go away and say, oh, this is a failure, it isn't anything, where it still has some transformative things in the bill that we can build on in the future. So I don't want to get lost in that. But I think, yeah, I agree with you. It was kind of crazy to do it all in one thing, but there was hope springs eternal that was the right way to go. And now we see that it wasn't, and people will move away from it and not do the final push we need to actually get what's included in it passed, which is really $2 trillion isn't a small amount of money that we put into programs. So I think we've, I had to fix my head around that, and I think we do. But I think our job is to educate people, and we're going to get materials out to people that talk about, we need to move forward, these are good things, and then try to pick up the pieces of the things that were dropped out of it.
Phil, what do you think?
I was going to ask a question because it's more, I was reading an article from Politico. I mean, I don't totally understand the reconciliation process. So whatever passes with this Build Back Better, could the Democrats come back next year with another reconciliation bill to try to pick up some of that?
Sure. Every year,
One.
you can have, I think this year we could have 2 because of different, but it's all what yes, we could absolutely. And I think back to the previous question is like, we may want to think about strategy of how we do that rather than lumping and how we want to do that. But yes, there's an opportunity to, and I think this was a starting phase, maybe we focus on housing next year or something. I think we've got to get more focused in terms of kind of things that we unite around and really push.
But this has to do with this reconciliation process, right? It's not just it's this idea that we have one shot to pass any legislation at all because of the filibuster.
Exactly.
Is that right? That's why we're not seeing 20 bills, is because it all has to be passed in this reconciliation process that's connected to the budget.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So should we be advocating for an end of the filibuster?
That would be ideal, but there's slippery slopes there. We don't know who's going to be controlling Congress next year.
I don't know if any of you watched Rachel Maddow last night. That she had Senator Angus King, who's changed his mind about it, but again talked about the slippery slope that it's taken him a long time to come to the position that maybe the filibuster has to be changed. But the concern is, if the Republicans are in charge 2 years from now, that Mitch McConnell will run rampant with it.
Yeah. They need some modification, and I'm not I don't understand it completely to say a suggestion, but yeah, it works both ways. It can be really good and really bad. So right now, and you're right, that's a very important point. Why we crammed everything into one is that we virtually had to.
Well, let me maybe take a position that's maybe not quite so dim on this. I think the brilliance of Build Back Better was its comprehensive nature in terms of its overall impact on the economy. And I think if they had piecemealed it and not put it under one package, a lot more would have fallen off the table. And I think $2 trillion, if we can retain its comprehensive nature, is important. It's also valuable in that it educates the public about the value of all these things and how they're interconnected. And so what is left on the table or left off the table when this passes, we can pick that up in a more segmented way. But I don't know that if we started by doing that, whether that would succeed.
No, I
Or
think,
will-
I'm glad you said that, Peter, because I think there's some true validity in what you're saying.
The problem is the thing that's most on everybody's radar. Okay, I'll speak for myself. I sort of realize what's in the bill when it gets chucked out. And so this
Right.
conversation has been very helpful for me to remember what's still in there and what, as you put it, are the things that there is consensus within the Democratic caucus around, like, to these consensus issues. I'm with Fran. It seems strange that we can't have a broader consensus, for example, that we need childcare. I mean, everybody's concerned that there's not enough people in the workforce right now. And
Childcare is hanging in there.
yeah, so great. So do you know what I mean? If I could, I got to get into my head what is in this bill
Right.
and really going to be there so that we can have a better sort of community conversation about why it matters versus here's a bill that's essentially the entire Biden agenda. Okay, now there's no college tuition support. Okay, now there's nothing for the climate. Okay, now, oh, all right, so why would I care,
But I think you're right. And I think, what's your first name again? I keep,
Oh, sorry, I'm Heather. I shouldn't really go by Westminster Presbyterian here.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
right. I think you're right, Heather, and I think that's becomes our job after we kind of get the framework is to say, rah, these things are good things rather than focus on what was chucked out. We want to say that, but we don't want to diminish the wonderfulness of what's going to remain and diminish the bill and say, why bother? You tossed out community college, so now I don't care about the bill.
Well, we're just have 5 minutes before we end here, and this is usually the point in our forum where we talk about next steps and action steps. And so that's a great lead-in to this, Mary, that an important next step or an action step for me is to pay attention to what remains in this bill and to be able to articulate what is of value to me as a person and as a person of faith that's in this bill that that makes it so I should support it.
Yeah, and I think those are the two action steps of really that thinking about it as we move forward to really create education and a drumbeat to pass this bill, because it can get, like I said, all gummed up and not move forward and not get it done. So our message to, I think you can call Chuck Schumer and say, I want you to keep in X, Y, and Z. Those are vital. Within these next couple days, it's important to do that. But after, so I think we need to talk to every one of our congressional delegation and say, we need you to move forward on this and do not let this completely fall apart. You know, it's like pass it, but right now we have the next 2 or 3 days to call Chuck Schumer and say, make sure you keep in housing, make sure you keep in the child tax, make sure you keep in all the vital things that we want to see, because they, you know, now is the time for that. But then the next step is we need you to pass this.
Could I ask Mary, what is currently in writing right now that we can send out to folks that, you know, has the provisions? That's one thing. And then the other would be, once this is nailed in the next 48 hours, framework that we have published what that framework is so that people can advocate.
I think we'll have I mean, right now, what we're getting is a list of guesses from our national partners.
Right.
And they change hourly. Hourly. And it's what's in and out. But I will say the dangerous ones that I've heard, and I've heard repeatedly, are the issues around housing, the issues around the home and community-based care. Those things are definitely sending off red flags. And also, I think people are really coming to terms that we may not see the Medicare expansion as robustly as Bernie Sanders has been advocating for. You know, so I don't know that there's, I mean, I could send you the best guesses of people, but like I said, that'll change by tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I want to just give Phil a quick chance to, if you have any sense of a next step or an action step that you'd like to see.
Well, this is just another step in the battle for justice.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. We can't quit. Can't quit. And we got to keep fighting. I told my wife the other day I was a little discouraged as they were chopping up this bill. I'm saying, well, on to the next battle. we have no choice.
Yeah.
This is our calling.
But I really appreciate your time, Phil, and your time, Mary, and everybody here today, because part of keeping on is having a sense of community around the work, and to feel like there's a lot of good people who are in this fight and who have been for a long time and will continue to be. And that keeps me from being discouraged. So thank you for the work you do.
Well,
Amen.
thank you all
Amen.
for the work you do.
Yeah.
Any closing words, Peter?
Oh, I was just going to say that Riverside Church had published a tool to contact your Congress people, Schumer and the president, and you can find that on their website, the Riverside Church. And also Citizen Action, I believe, has published a similar tool.
Thank you all. We shall meet again. The conversation continues.
And we'll send you stuff as we get it.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank
See y'all.
you.
See you, Rick. See you, Rick.
Thank you.